time, the trains that Gordon's mentioned, wondering whether this is actually meant to be running a train that's as old as that, as the trundle towards Aberdeen. A wee bit about my own background. I've been a trade union activist, trade union rep at local level and at national level since I started in further education, and like most college lecturers, I started on a 0 hours contract, on a completely temporary contract. Didn't know from one week to the next whether you were going to be working, what hours you were going to be working, and that's still the case that most colleges start people off on that. We've been running a big campaign against those as part of our national bargaining strategies, been to try to eliminate 0 hours contracts in the sector, but at the very least to drastically reduce them. And we've just won an agreement whereby after 2 years, people who are on any type of temporary contract will have those hours made permanent. So that's just one example of how the trade unions can be a positive force in the workplace and a positive force in society, particularly for younger workers. So I've worked in further education for about 20 years. However, I've been an activist for longer than that, and actually it's very interesting, I'll tell you a bit later about Twitter as well, about some of the assumptions that are made about trade union activists, because I was actually a pro-independence activist long before I was in the workplace, and at the age of 16, in fact, 27 years ago today, those that remember their dates of the general elections, 27 years ago today was the day after the 1992 general election. Do you remember that was the one where the Tories got 25% of the vote in Scotland, and we all said, oh, look how low the Tory votes slipped, not realising, of course, that in 1997 it would drop further. And 27 years ago today was the start of the vigil for the Scottish Parliament. That was what got me involved in politics. So I was involved in campaigning for Home Rule long before I was a trade unionist, and actually almost like another way around, it was the kind of the pro-independence and the campaign for Home Rule and the campaign for a better, more democratic, fairer Scotland that actually got me involved in trade unions. First of all, in the Timex picket line, when I should have been at school, by the reason I failed my hires. And then after that, Liverpool Dockers, lots of other campaigns as well. And I've always believed that trade unions are a positive force in society. And I think it's really important that those of us who are trying to change Scotland and trying to win Scottish independence understand something of the proud trade union movement in our country. And you already mentioned the miners' strike, but going back before that, the campaigns that trade unions have fought and won around health and safety, around the length of the working week, around the protections in terms of the use of child labour in the workforce. You know, many of the things that make the most progressive reforms in terms of workplace legislation and health and safety legislation, they've always been driven by trade unions, not by politicians and certainly not by bosses. So I think it's really, really important that we understand that and understand why it's so important to be part of a trade union if you're in the workplace. And pass that message on as well, particularly to younger workers. I think that is something that has been lost over the last 20, 30 years, has been that sense of why you should be in a trade union. And I'm really proud in my workplace, I teach a class at Kelvin College, but in the further education sector as a whole, where we've really increased our density of trade union membership, because that's a really, really important part of organising the workplace, is trying to get as many people as possible into trade union. And in my sector, I work with people who come from a whole variety of different backgrounds, and many of them have never been in a trade union, never been in a workforce where trade unions are organised, and you spend a lot of your time having conversations about what even is a trade union, what does a trade union do. I sit, and I think management thought they were being funny, but they gave me a seat in amongst the hair and beauty lecturers at the college. Most of whom have always worked in small businesses, and maybe run their own salons, and maybe worked with other small groups of women. And you're talking to them about why would you join a trade union? What does it mean if you go on strike? Why are we campaigning for this? But people absolutely understand it when you say, well, this is about the fact that you're on a 0 hours contract, and this is about fighting for you to get better maternity leave. This is about making sure that the chemicals that you're using when you're working in the salon are safe and that those are properly checked. So I think it's really, really important that we educate ourselves about the role of trade unions, and that we challenge some of the assumptions and some of the stereotypes about what trade union is and what a trade union does. Because to me, trade unions are an absolutely vital part of any kind of democratic society. And campaigning for independence is absolutely about talking about the fundamentals of what kind of country do we want, what kind of democracy do we want, what kind of freedom of speech do we want, how do we want our country to be run. And trade unions are absolutely a critical part of that. a part of that kind of fabric of where do the critical voices come from in our society? Who stands up and says, actually, I think that's wrong, or actually, I think this is how our public services should be run, or how our public transport system should be run, or how we should look after our young people or our older people. And trade unions are a hugely important part of that. Apart from anything else, trade unions represent a huge number of people. There's more than 500,000 people in Scotland who are members of trade unions. That's not including those who are retired and still keep on their trade union membership or still consider themselves to be supporters of trade unions. That's more than 500,000 people who are currently working who are members of trade unions. And if you look, and I know my own sort of, if they ask me to think of a trade unionist, probably my first thoughts is somebody who looks like Arthur Scargill and has a funny comb over and a jacket and a big shouty voice and a megaphone. But if you look at who's a member of a trade union in Scotland, then increasingly they're female, increasingly they work in public sector, increasingly they come from minority groups, or perhaps have disabilities, or perhaps older women. These are absolutely the people that we need to win over if we're going to win the next independence referendum. And I think it is a huge mistake to say, oh, trade unions, they're part of the Labour Party, trade unions, they're affiliated with the Labour Party. Yes, as Gordon says, there may be trade union bureaucrats who are anti-SNP or who are pro-Labour Party. They're not the vast majority of members. And in terms of a referendum, it's the trade union members that we need to worry about rather than one or two bureaucrats at the top. And I think in terms, and Gordon's touched on this, in terms of the SNP as the government need to be separated from the Yes movement. And I think that's absolutely the crux of the issue. That we elect a government, whether that's the SNP or any other political party, we elect a government to run the country. A referendum in the Yes movement absolutely has to be separate to that. And I think in some areas last time we managed that, and I think the Radical Independence campaign is a really good example of it. I think for a lot of us in terms of our local groups, we managed to separate the two. And I live in Ayrshire, during the last referendum I lived in Troon. If anybody's been to Troon, it's a kind of funny place, it's quite conservative. We were really, really pleased when we hit 40% support for independence, because we started at about 5% support. I have to say, Troon is the only place I've ever been in my life where people will openly admit to voting Conservative. And I was like really taken aback the first time it happened. I was like, don't say that in public, look embarrassed. But we even had a Yes Tory in our local group in Troon. But I think one of the successes of our local group was that we managed to bring together people from right across the political spectrum. And yes, probably the majority of people in the room were SNP members, or certainly the vast majority of people in the room voted SNP. But we managed to separate, at least for the duration of the referendum, we separated out the SNP and the Yes movement at a local level. And I think that's critically important. As an EIS activist, I'm very, very critical, particularly of John Swinney, because I think he's an absolutely diabolical education secretary. That doesn't mean that I'm not going to vote SNP. I voted SNP in the last election, I will vote SNP in the next election. I actually thought I hated Mike Russell before him, and I think Mike Russell was probably marginally better. I think it's really, really important that there are critical voices that say, actually, John Swinney, your education bill's absolute mince, and there's a reason why the Tories are the only ones that are supporting it. And I think, actually, for the SNP and for the government, it is unhealthy when you have a political opposition, as you do in Scotland, who are utterly, utterly useless. And the one thing that makes me despair more than John Swinney is when we're looking at the Labour benches and going, who even is it? Still Ian Great? Who even is your education secretary? And I know it's Ian Great, who met with him a few weeks ago about our dispute. So as a trade unionist, absolutely I will be critical of the Scottish Government. That is a key part of my role as a trade unionist, is to be critical, particularly the public sector trade unionist. So I work for a college, and the college is my employer, but more than 95% of the college's funding comes from the Scottish Government. And a lot of trade unions in Scotland, a lot of the big trade unions in Scotland, then either we work directly for the Scottish Government, or we work for organisations, local authorities, colleges, etc., whose funding comes from the Scottish Government. And so you cannot expect to be the party of government and not to be criticised for some of your policies. But actually, you need to be criticised for your policies. You need that critical voice, or your policies start to get lazy and you start to make bad policy decisions. And I think one of the problems we have in Scotland at the moment, in terms of the healthiness of our democracy, is the fact that, and I think this is inevitable, and I think until we get out of this, we're almost in this kind of limbo period at the moment of waiting for the next referendum. But until we get out of that period, the Labour Party are not going to get their act together and rebuild. And I think the Greens are too small a voice in Scottish Parliament. I think that's a real issue for the SNP, and that there isn't really an effective political opposition in the Parliament. And it bluntens your argument. You become blunt, you become lazy in your arguments and your policies. And I think it's really, really important that trade unions, as part of that civic society, are able to have that critical voice and able to say, actually, we think you've got this wrong, but this is something that you could do better. And I think the RMP's campaigns around the public ownership of Scotland have been really important there. And I mentioned earlier that the EIS has a political fund. We've never affiliated to a political party. The EIS is one of the oldest trade unions in the world, and it's the oldest teaching union in the world. So we've never affiliated to a political party. Instead, we use that political fund to campaign around education issues, and we lobby all of the political parties on education issues. Obviously, many of them around schools, around teacher shortages, and there's been a huge amount in the press recently around teacher shortages and critical shortages in subject areas, teacher stress levels and what have you. But we also campaign around wider education issues, around the role of further education, for example, around in the moment we're very involved in looking at lecturer professionalism. So the idea that trade unions are just about fighting for pay, or just about going out and strike, or just about defending their members' terms and conditions, absolutely, that's the bread and butter. We make no apology for fighting for our members, but we also fight for a better society. We also fight to defend the sectors that we work in and to improve the sectors we work in. And I think there's a lot of scope in terms of collaboration there as well. And there are lots of times when the Scottish Government do listen to us and actually say, well, you work in the sector, you have some idea of what you're talking about. And so I think in terms of the next time around, and how do we win, because that's got to be the key question, is how do we win an independence referendum the next time round, and what role do the trade unions have in that? I think we need to be really, really careful about attitudes and assumptions, and some of the stuff, I do spend a fair bit of time on Twitter, mainly doing trade union things, and some of the stuff on Twitter has just been absolutely bizarre. I've been accused variously of working for Militant or working for the MI5, and I was like, well, make your mind up, because they're both in London and they both begin with an M, but they have quite different organisations, and actually neither of them have been in touch with me. So you get some really quite bizarre accusations, but in particular, interestingly, not directed at college lecturers, who are probably too small to attract attention, but directed at the teachers. You'll see I'm wearing my free t-shirt that I got from the EIS around the Value Education, Value Teachers campaign. The main body of the EIS, the teachers section of the EIS, was campaigning for a 10% pay rise for teachers that would partly address the way in which teachers' pay has dropped over the last more than 10 years, very close to 15 years, the way in which teachers' pay has dropped in real terms. And you cannot separate the drop in teachers' pay from the fact that we would struggle to recruit teachers in absolutely key areas like STEM subjects. Key areas also like things like home economics as well, like teaching basic life skills when we cannot recruit teachers. And so the teachers' pay campaign, that was a really high profile campaign. We had 30,000 members marched in Glasgow last year. It's the biggest single union mobilisation since the miners' strike in Scotland. That's a huge number of people, almost all of whom will vote in the next referendum. That's the other thing about trade unionists. They're interested enough in the world around them to pay a subscription and to join a trade union. They're very likely to vote in elections. They're very likely to vote in the next referendum. That march last October, 30,000 teachers through the centre of Glasgow. The vast majority of them were young women. And it was really noticeable. I'm 43, the majority of people in that march were visibly younger than me. Really critically important people that we need to reach. They're also people who then influence others as well. So they're people who are engaged, they're interested in the world around them, they're educated, they will articulate ideas and they will reach other people. So we had a very high profile campaign. And we won that campaign, so the teachers won, and they just accepted their pay rise, but also with other things attached to it as well in terms of looking at teacher workload. FE lecturers, I have to say, we're still on strike, but we just get shunted off to the sidelines. But we're delighted for the teachers, but the reaction on Twitter from elements of the independence movement was just toe-curlingly embarrassing. And you're like, people need to remember that Twitter is a public forum, and that if you're attacking the EIS, and you're attacking Larry Flanagan, you're attacking teachers, and you were hearing all kinds of mad things. Okay, the MI5 stuff I can rule out is just the one kind of lone nutter But some of the stuff around, particularly around this issue of labour can wait, this idea that somehow teachers should wait for Scottish independence to ask for a pay rise. I mean, if you'd said that to people in 1979, just wait for it, devolution's round the corner, just wait for devolution, you'd have been waiting 20 years. I don't think we will wait 20 years this time, but absolutely we cannot afford to put other parts of our society on hold to wait for independence. And I think it's a really dangerous argument. So people argue, oh, well, you know, the country will be bankrupt before we're even independent. What kind of fragile economy? If we're arguing Scotland can be independent, that Scotland's a wealthy country, we can't then in the same breath accept all the Tory arguments around austerity and say, oh, the country will be bankrupt. And I think we need to look very carefully at attitudes. And also, we need to make sure we don't swallow the mainstream media's nonsense about trade unions. Because one of the things I've noticed from our members, when we've been out on strike, we've had 4 days of strike action now, we're about to go into a results boycott, which is not going to be popular. And we've already got the media attacking us. The one thing I'm noticing with our members is when the BBC say stuff about our strike that's not true, our member says, well, it's BBC, you can't believe them. Look at the lies they told you in the referendum. And that's having a real impact on our members. We actually marched in the BBC in 2017 when we were on strike before, much to the embarrassment of the EIS, who phoned us up and told us to stop it straight away. But by that time we were already there. And it was our members who wanted to march. It was our members who were saying, the BBC are telling lies about us. We need to march to the BBC, we need to tell them to stop. That directly, I'm quite clear that directly came from 2014 and the marches to the BBC then. But we need to be very careful as independent supporters that we don't swallow the nonsense the mainstream media tell us about trade unions, because most of it is nonsense. And this whole discourse about greedy teachers or greedy rail workers or unreasonable trade unionists, this is a myth that has been peddled for generations. And if we believe ourselves to be progressives and we want to see a better Scotland, then we have to start challenging that. We have to be involved in our trade unions and our workplaces, and we have to encourage others to use that voice as well. And absolutely, in our fight for independence, we cannot be accepting more of the same. We are fighting for a better country. We have to be fighting for a country that has a real fair work convention that actually means it, and that trade unions are an absolutely central part of that landscape.